Hi everyone, Acesup here. Straight into the action. We've got pocket sixes, and it looks like around an M4 to 16 M4, just over M4 on the button. Can't see any way we can fold the sixes there. Easy call, and look at the flop. Thanks for coming. Full house on the turn, and it is the big 55 with 10 players left. So we are going to the final table. Straight into it. This is actually a post 2 months 40k recording. Series has actually finished. For whatever reason, can't quite recall why. I didn't record any audio. I think I was perhaps just wanted to zone in. Maybe my voice was a bit gruff or I had a cold. Could be a few reasons, I guess. But for whatever it might be, I feel like I'm a guest on my own show, actually recording post and watching myself play. So hopefully we'll see some good decisions. And we're on the final table now where we want to start to sort of formulate a bit of a plan. And so we can see that 50. We've got a pretty healthy M size, don't we? Looks like we're almost to M16. El Gabi there opens and folds. He's got a pretty decent stack, and there's some pretty good stacks behind he can get some good leverage against, so I'd expect him to be opening a bit, and you can expect us to be opening a bit. I think this open is quite good here because the big blind is, we can see he's only defending so far. We only have 136 hands on him, but he's been quite tight. 8% for defending big blind. Hasn't been stealing and that sort of thing very much. Now, he is short, so perhaps he hasn't had many opportunities. But I think that it's also very hard for those stacks behind us who haven't been 3-betting a great deal to 3-bet us too light because they commit themselves to the big blind in that particular instance. So it was a bit of a cheeky steal, but we got away with it. I think that... yeah, I mean, we're in a pretty good position here, I think. This Becky 1981 to our left. So far, the stats indicate that there could be a bit aggressive. So we're just going to keep that in mind in case we get 3-bet. Now, in this sort of instance, you know, I do generally like to go after the big stacks, put pressure on them, providing they're not some, you know, complete sickos. Interesting spot here where this small blind has been 3-bet. And this is kind of exactly what I was just talking about when I say going after the big stacks. These guys, I mean, they're not exactly, they're not super deep. But this trade day 3 gets really good leverage here. Now, will the small blind take it to the next level and 4-bet? It must have been pretty tempting for him because that player does look quite aggressive. And, you know, blind versus blind. The other thing too about that sort of instance where it's blind on blind is you're kind of sending a bit of a message to the small blind, which is sometimes can have a bit of value, you know, a bit of future value. Although it's probably a little bit too early to be thinking too much about it, but especially short-handed, I find that sort of, you know, this psychology comes into play a bit more. We've got the pocket tens here, pretty easy open, obviously. But we wouldn't really be loving a 3-bet. Good flop. Now the player to our left is called a UTG raise and called the flop bet. It's a pretty tough spot. He could sometimes be trapping with the stack size that he has, hoping to get a jam behind, or potentially just, you know, not want to 3-bet UTG because it looks so strong. He could be disguising his hand. You can see I'm going through his stats here. And he's, yeah, pretty standard sort of player, I'd say. He does have his 1 million badge showing and his supernova. He actually looks kind of tight from late position. So, pretty standard from early. And we do have 1k hands on him, so that's kind of interesting. It's always kind of interesting to see that sort of that stat line. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Checking here. I think you can go either way. I do think if you bet, it's getting a little bit hard to get worse to call. It is a 2-3-5 flop, so I guess sometimes he might have just flatted pre with ace king, or sometimes, also maybe float with ace queen. I don't know how often he shows up with sets, but having said that, he actually does show up with sets because he's got pocket fours. So I guess he can have all hands in his range. Twos, threes, fours, fives, that sort of thing. Against an M, he started the hand. I think we started both around sort of M, 10 to 12. Don't really like his flat call there from second with the fours. I mean, you can't call a re-raise. You just don't think the implied odds are there. The times that he gets blown off his hand from a 3-bet squeeze behind or a jam. Obviously, against UTG, there's not going to be that much squeezing going on unless it's a pretty nutty hand, but I just don't know how often. Sure, if he flops a set, the world's his oyster, but I don't know how often he's actually going to flop a set and then get us to pay him off and get, max value for his, in that particular instance. But it's not too surprising just looking at his stats because, Well, I mean, I guess he is kind of standard. Looking at him now, 17% from early, 18% from mid, 42 from late. I guess he does open reasonably from late position from the stats we can see now on the screen HUD. 15% defense small blinds, probably a little bit on the tight side, but I'd say that call, is kind of what I would expect from like a sort of a weakish type of reg, the set mine from early there. I just don't think it's going to be profitable, but at the same time, if he does happen to flop a set, against UTG, we're likely to have a lot of strong hands, so there is some merit to it, but I just don't think it's going to be a good play. Some players in that instance actually take the more aggressive route and actually 3-bet it. But again, against UTG, we're not getting too out of line with the stack distribution that we've got around the table because there's a few too many stacks that can 3-bet us and actually do it to fold. And a few too many players that I think would probably just call us as well. We've got the pocket fours here. You can see I've been going around the table, noting all the players. Now, this is a little bit different to before because we're quite deep now, aren't we? We've got effectively M17-ish. Is that right? 16-ish against chucklers. And also we're in position here, and there's only 3 players behind, so there's less chance of it being squeezed here. So this is a more clear sort of situation where you can get more involved with a pocket pair. Rather than the other instance where the stacks are a bit more shallow and you still had 7 players behind. I think a call on the flop is pretty mandatory. It's pretty interesting here because we could do a few things with this hand, couldn't we? I'd like to see myself bet turn here for protection. I just do not think we're going to get check raised very often, big stack versus big stack. I think he's going to give us a lot of credit for calling his early position raise. We can certainly do that with jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, 5s. We can have ace 10 of diamonds, king, queen of diamonds and hands like that. So having said all of that, I'd like to see myself go about half pot here. If he does call, it's, I don't mind the bet size actually. It's not too bad a bet size. I'd probably go a little bit bigger though, I think, with flushes and bigger pairs as well. So I think I could have gone a little bit bigger there. I'd just give him a little bit of an easier decision than I'd like with some of his weaker holdings. I think now, there's really the 2 options. There's either bomb it and try and rep, 5s, 7s, 9s, or, 6s, or a flush. We can either bomb it or we can just check and hope that he just called turn with something like ace queen with a diamond, ace jack with a diamond. As it was, he has queen, so I like the way he played it. He doesn't really want to bet turn and get shoved on or raised. He's in a pretty gross spot if he does that. Having said that, there's not too much worse that's going to call him if he fires turn. We're probably going to release the 4s if he fires turn. He could be bluffing us off the best hand some of the time. If he's got, ace king with a diamond, he might double barrel. But I think on that board, I think that, oh, hello, aces. I think that he played it okay and probably got more value by checking turn. Obviously, he had the flush draws back up. I think if I had bet a bit harder turn, we would have had a pretty good river shove size. So that's another consideration too, is if we just bet a little bit bigger, maybe closer to 2/3 pot on the turn, we can look at shoving on the river. Very hard for him to call with the top of his range, which is, what he had at queens. Very hard for him to call down there with queens, but I guess he might be able to find a call. It was really just classic pot control, wasn't it? But yeah, it's really a 2-street hand, I guess. He's not really going to get that much value from 3 streets, so. Unless we happen to have tens or jacks, and even then he's pushing it. And there's always the risk that we turn it into a bluff and put him, under a lot of pressure. I will be speeding up the action, guys, when I'm not too involved in pots, which is why this user Mark he's flashing a little bit faster than normal there. We had the ace-3 there, but I just don't really think it's going to be a profitable steal from there, just because there's a few too many jammy stacks as well as guys that can 3-bet us. It probably would have been a little bit nicer if the stacks were a little bit more reversed, and so we do see the call here by 8s. It's probably a little bit loose. Yeah, I think they're both around M4, which makes it probably a bad call when you're considering ICM. 340. Yeah, I think it was probably a bad call with 8s there, but the red mark that I have around that player indicates that they're probably a weaker opponent, and the purple is a kind of a bit of a big fish, and the green is solid, a good player, so it's obviously a really good table to be at. Having said that, sometimes the maniacs do sort of put you under a bit of pressure at final tables because they're ignorant of ICM, which then affects your own ICM. We could actually probably peel there, yeah. I thought I might. This guy's just so short, and I don't think Mark's going to get too out of control when he really wants this guy to bust, so he can move up in pay, make sure he gets up one level on the pay ladder. So I think the 2-4 there, we're unlikely if we happen to flop something post. It's unlikely he's going to put us in tough spots. Just unlikely we're going to get in tough spots anyway with that hand. Would have to be some really weird spot where we flop 2-pair and bet, or bet turn after it goes check, and then they get raised on like a king queen 4-2 board or something weird where he can have somehow trapped us or done something funky. It's just a matter of calling, trying to hit, and bust the other player. The pot odds were a little bit too good, even with a hand like 2-4 against this particular, against that player, with that player Mark involved. He's likely to give us a lot of free cards, as he did. It's very important when you're making your plays from the big blind, when you're calling, to weigh up your opponent. And, if they are aggressive and they do barrel a lot, when that could be a reason to call, with a nice king-jack suited, and just call down with, a decent pair and that sort of thing, and let them barrel. Pretty close, probably a little bit too hard to 3-bet there, I think. A little bit awkward with these stacks, and that's what I was saying before. It would have been good if the stacks were in different positions. Ideally with the bigger stacks to our left and the shorter stacks to our right. Pretty nice steal there. The stacks are all ideal, aren't they? We've got an M, 7.5 to our immediate left, and to the left of that player, M6, and then we've got Mark in who was big blind last hand, with around M10. And having just opened and now seeing the ace-queen suited, that's a pretty nice spot. Kind of a bit weird to see Becky just flat, but I'm liking it when I see this flop. I think the bet size is probably okay. I mean, we don't really want to bet tiny. I think most of the time, I mean, the players will have somewhat of an elastic range. This is going to be pretty sickening if Becky's got King Jack here and has decided to just flat it pre and not jam it and flop the nuts on us. And that's exactly what Becky has done. So, yeah, you can imagine that turn card if we had a bet tiny and then the king comes on the turn. I mean, the problem's really twofold, that we could be behind, but we could also now not get value from hands that might have given us value, like ace-9 and that sort of thing, which is why we want to bet reasonably sized on the flop. But obviously it wouldn't have mattered what we would have done because Becky's in there with the king jack. But, you know, I think the king jack call there, I think it was king jack suited, so I personally would have shoved it, but I think that calling with it is okay as well. Certainly didn't do anything wrong, that particular play in that hand, in my opinion. I mean, it is the sort of hand that you can call with, I think, king jack, king queen suited. The player's a little bit shallow, but at the same time, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just going to play very easily post. Most of the time, you're going to have a top pair, or in that instance, the nuts. Good bet size here, I think. It's probably a bet size that I'd be making with my entire range. I'd be c-betting this board a lot with my whole range. So I definitely want to be c-betting it with my ace, all my aces. I don't think we can get any more value in that hand, but I wouldn't have minded seeing myself make a bet on the river, to be honest. But I think checking is fine. That player's probably not likely to 3-bet too wide in that spot against an early position open. You know, so they could once in a while have ace jack and even ace queen, I think, might flat there. Even ace king could. And there's always some other surprise hands they could roll up with. Pretty hard to get multiple streets from worse there, but yeah, it was probably played okay. If the board had a run out a little bit differently, maybe we could have gone for another street. But yeah, on that sort of board there with the ace 7-2, I think it was, wasn't it? I mean, I'm going to be betting with, if I've got jack queen suited, I'm going to be c-betting. So I don't want to be betting too big on that board with my value ace 10 because I want to make sure I'm, be betting pretty similar with my whole range there with top pairs and better and all my sort of bluffs, that sort of thing. So not that I'm going to be thinking too much. I mean, I'm going to be just thinking fairly exploitively in this instance. And, against a big blind, it's a pretty clear c-betting board. And it's just not a board that I think the big blind is ever going to really get too carried away with. So pretty close there. I actually would like to have seen myself 3-bet there. I think that YR is probably opening really wide, and we get good leverage with 3-bet. The stats indicate that he's opening 43% from late. Pretty hard for him to shove on us. What I do find sometimes in that particular instance is that he's got a pretty good stack, so he probably doesn't want to take a big risk. You can almost sometimes, even though he can put pressure on us from an ICM point of view, it's very interesting, the psychology of the player. I mean, obviously, I'm just speculating here. Maybe he just wants to go crazy and put pressure on anyone that's got a stack around half his. But what you sometimes see in that instance is that he feels he can sort of coast through without doing anything too crazy with the stack he's got. A nice M18, sort of his second chip leader. Sometimes they don't want to shove in half their stack and be wrong and go down and be just one of the crowd. It would have been interesting to see if he, what he would have done to a 3-bet if we had have gone down that option, taken that option. Be very surprised to see a fold from Mark here, but nothing would surprise me. You can see that I have clicked the discuss deal to see I think more so just to get a feel for who's. I certainly wouldn't be dealing at this point, but just to get a feel for if the dealing is on the table, it's always good. Oh, I mean, I could deal if if the deal was if the numbers were right. I mean, if people wanted to throw a few extra dollars at me, I probably wouldn't turn it down. It's kind of a bit of a strategical decision, really, the discuss deal. Because if everybody's keen to deal, sometimes you can use that to your advantage. Sometimes players will tighten up if they know that the deal is likely to be done quite soon. I guess Marky's going to fold now that he's tanking like this. It looks like he's just 3-bet a third of his stack. He may have been happy to call our jam, but now he feels like a 4-bet from Shucklers is like extra strong, potentially. He's got a stack size where, he could clearly have just shoved pre. It wouldn't have been a big shove at all. He's only M7-ish, just over. So, I mean, this is a weird play. Sometimes you see, wow, okay. He's just slow rolling. I mean, you can just never fold that hand. It's just bad luck. I think he's just was enjoying the moment. His final roll of the dice to try and get a stack. Or bust. And for him, unfortunately, it was the latter. And the chips go to the good player, which is not the best result. I mean, obviously, Shuckler's 4-bet jam there looks very strong because Mark did look kind of committed with his 3-bet sizing at that stack depth. But, I mean, once the pot is that big, Ace-King is obviously always a call. Unless it's some weird situation where there's just a whole bunch of other tiny stacks out there and you can literally just fold your way up a few places in the pay ladder. But we're certainly not in that situation here. In fact, the chips are all fairly evenly distributed, with the exception of the player 2 to our left, who's quite short now, who has around M4. And we've only got M10, so got a little bit of a vulnerable stack size. The other thing, too, about the 6-9 suited when I didn't 3-bet YR before is... if we didn't, it was a pretty good spot to 3-bet because we only had Becky behind us, and we get good leverage also against Becky. Our effective stack size just enables us to get good leverage. If we don't take that option, we don't actually have that many good spots to 3-bet. Because while the player 2 to our left, AA Lul KK, is in that position, it's kind of a little bit annoying. Because if we 3-bet too light and he jams on us, we have to call off. And we don't really want to do it with some sort of, really marginal hand. So, see the Jack-6 from the small blind there getting involved. And just folding there, obviously. The 5-6. I say obviously, but again, you could... With the stack depth that we've got at the moment, 3-betting is on the cards. We get pretty good leverage. It's just a matter of getting the right timing. Right now is probably not. I don't see Shucklers opening too wide there. From early, they're not particularly loose. So you do want to, if you can in this instance, try and work out what your game plan is in terms of getting chips without getting to showdown. That's a lot of the time what the final table is all about. And so in this particular instance, we'd probably be looking to 3-bet YR when he opens, and potentially, El Gabi. So I do kind of regret not taking the 6-9 suited before, I think. Because we just might not get that many good 3-betting spots. And we really want to try and stay ahead of the blinds. That should be part of your strategy too, is to not let the blinds creep up to where you get down to sort of M6 or 7 where you just can't really maneuver. All you're going to be doing is 3-bet shoving or folding. And potentially you might have a steal or two up your sleeve, which is always nice, but then you're going to lose that ability too once you get under M6. You're sort of just jamming or folding. So it's nice if you can keep yourself sort of around M10. This is one of those cheeky steals that we can make. This is a pretty good steal. It's not bad, but we could still get 3-bet light by some of the players' buttons, small blind, big blind. Could still make it 100 and, sort of 12. Put a little bit of pressure on us. Again, this is, I think, a bet that I'll be c-betting on pretty consistently. You could check this board, but the problem with checking is there's just a lot of sort of bad cards, and yeah, we limit our options if we do that. I think in normal play, deeper stacks checking, there's a lot of merit to checking back, especially against loose defenders, because we've got the over, we could have the best hand, backdoor straight, and we might be able to call some turn bets or make some magic happen on later streets. But in this particular instance, we don't really have that ability, and I think the big blind is not going to get that out of line anyway. And so I'd prefer to just keep it simple, bet, and try to win the pot. We could barrel on the 10, but our stats sort of say that El Gabi hasn't been defending that loosely, although we only have 171 hands, which makes me think that his range is pretty queen heavy, but he could have 6s or 4s, and as it was, he's floated with ace-jack. So I guess if we fire turn, he's going to fold. That's a hand that I really hope we would have folded out with a bet on the flop. So I'm kind of surprised to see that. I'm not that surprised, but I think it's a pretty bad check call, to be honest, because he could only potentially have a few outs, he can get barreled off his hand with any bet on the turn very easily if he doesn't hit. If he does hit, he could still be dead. We are in early position. We can easily have ace queen and big queens, or ace king and that sort of thing. So I think that you do see that a fair bit though from these weaker players, is they just like to check call out of position with ace high. I think it's kind of a big leak, to be honest. Obviously it worked for him that time, but we were just pretty far down in our range there with the ace 5. Even if we had pocket deuces, we'd probably check. We get to showdown. That's the problem with the ace jack, is in that instance. I do see it a fair bit. Everything has to go your way for you to win that hand. That's why I think it's a leak, is because firstly, your opponent has to not have you beat. Secondly, he has to not have a hand he can barrel with on the turn that's going to make you fold. And then, thirdly, the board just has to run out clean. So everything sort of has to go your way. Having said that, I do like to sometimes float if I've got a hand like ace queen out of position on a board like 9-5-2, because if you do check call in that spot, aces and queens are cards that your opponent will barrel on a lot, and you can get some value. We got some good action here. It looked like it was going to be a bit of a, I wouldn't say cooler with the 8s, but wow, they do manage to flop a set. So it's kind of a little bit annoying for us. But at the same time, at least Shuckle didn't win the pot. If you're going to think positively, he didn't win the pot. So at least I guess that gives us a little bit chance of victory. Technically, I guess. Even though I personally would obviously have preferred that the shorter stack busted so we could move up in pay given the size of our stack. But at the same time, it probably actually does give us... you can see I'm just noting here. Yeah, 8-8 was likely crushed there, so I've given him the special. Super special. And it was a pretty disgusting pot, actually, for Shucklers, because it would have just given him a really nice chip lead. Yeah. And I think they're really the sort of mistakes you expect these players to be making. Having said that, he is kind of short. He was kind of short, so. But it was a bit of an ugly hand. And, this is... Part of the reason 7, 14, 20, 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, M5 and 6 players behind means we need a pan of 30, and ace 9 is 27. So we were kind of close there. From an ICM point of view, it's probably bad to jam there because I think that some of these guys, we just saw the 8s get it in. I think some of these guys are going to call too light, which hurts us. Yeah, so. And we're just a little bit too short just to open fold, I think. We only had 11 big blinds, 12 big blinds. Generally, my rule of thumb is down to 13 big blinds. I'll open if I think it's really profitable, but that's kind of pushing it as you get down around that mark. Not in a heads up situation. Heads up, you can actually go a little bit lower than that, raise to fold. Well, quite a bit lower actually, but yeah. That's a story for another day, I think, for the where you can take the Poker Nerve Road to Success course. As you can see, I can imagine that spot there for YR is going to be opening pretty liberally. It's a pretty good raise spot, so I think that it's probably right now is a pretty good steal spot. But having said that, the ace-4 is kind of bottom of the barrel. I think that if it was suited, it'd be pretty close. And the other consideration is we don't actually have a ton of fold equity. I mean, we are under M5. So, he might call us a little bit light, which is kind of annoying. Again, hurts our ICM, which is, I think, part of the reason why I folded the ace high there. But that's that's pretty annoying. You get a hand, you look down, you're like, yes, we can jam this, try and pick up some chips, and then you get a UTG open. I think that we just have to release in that instance for all of the same reasons I just said. Even though against the UTG, though, it probably would have, would have looked pretty strong, so we actually might have got a little bit more fold equity, a little bit more credit. But you still have the chance of players behind waking up with a hand as well. So, as well as the UTG can still have a big hand, and but he does seem to be opening fairly liberally, that player, especially from late, but even a little bit loose from early. And you've got to remember it's only 7-handed now too, so. And with the sort of stack size he has, it's a pretty good stack size to be opening, especially with the media against the medium stacks. In that sort of instance, the medium stacks kind of say, well, I'm against an early player. Do I really want to move in now? I've got players behind me. And so they, more often than not, they fold some of those sort of more marginal hands. And then at the same time, when it gets around to the bigger stacks, they're like, well, do I really want to take on a big stack, out of position, or, again, play against an early position raiser and that sort of thing. So it's all these sort of dynamics, all the psychology of it that when it gets to the final table, you really want to sort of tune in to try and get a feel for what's going on. I think this one we just have no choice, even though, we do have a little bit of fold equity, but we're only around M4. But, El Gabi does open a little bit wide, and he does fold, so that's a nice one to pick up. It's really nice when you get that sort of M4 through like that, especially with fours, obviously. Just really a matter of surviving at this point. You can see I got a lot of notes on El Gabi. Must have been clashing a bit. And the blinds are up again, so So we're back under the pump, M4.5-ish. We can see YR here still pretty consistent with his opens and folds. So definitely looks like a good player to attack. Nice time to pick up the Ace-10 here. Ace-10 has a PN of 36, and we only have around M4.5, so that's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 25, 26, 27. M27, PN of 27 required. Ace-10 has 36, and that is a pretty loose call. Passes the beans. And we have just popped up. To almost M10 now. I think that Ace-9 call there is a mistake. Seven-handed, when the UTG jams M4.5, I think it's actually probably a pretty big mistake. If you're thinking about it in terms of PN as well, it's probably a really big mistake. Because, ICM aside, Ace-9 off has a PN of 27. And so if we said we had a PN of around that. So Ace-9 off would be a really borderline push for us. I would probably, I would have folded Ace-9 off. Suited I would have jammed. And Ace-8 suited I would have folded. So he's always behind, and more often than not he's going to be crushed. And that's one of the advantages of understanding, PN. Power numbers I'm talking about. If you're not sure about power numbers, how to use them, how to apply them, what they are, take the Poker Nerd Road to Success course, and it will improve your game immensely. Wow. Okay. Interesting one here. Snapped out the half pot and a fold. So we're seeing some sort of play we can perhaps expect to see from the red rings. Pretty good spot here, and if YR raises, I would just like to shove here. I think at M9 there's no point getting cute. We've seen that he's got a tendency to raise fairly wide and fold, and we've got a pretty strong hand. It's pretty close if it folds to us. Problem is if we raise and get jammed on, it's probably a fold from an ICM point of view. So I think that the question you really got to ask yourself, if it does fold to us, you can see that he's disconnected here, YR. I think the question you've got to ask yourself in this spot is how genuine are the blinds 3-bets? Now we can see that from the limited sample we have, we've got 3-bets of 7% and 6%. That's obviously going to be a lot higher versus us because we're perceived to be, pretty well, we steal fairly frequently. I think they'd imagine that. And we're on the button, so obviously we're going to be opening light. So this 3-betting is going to be a whole lot wider than that. Having said that, I don't feel like the big blind is going to get too out of control, but I do feel like Becky might. And so you got to weigh up the merits of, raising and then potentially getting jammed on and being forced to fold because of the ICM, or just shoving. We can just, from a mathematical point of view, it was a very profitable situation to just shove. But the question is, and the other thing you think about too is if we do just shove, how good is their calling? How close to ICM is their calling range going to be? Because if we get snap called by a hand like King Queen or like Ace-9 suited, like that's pretty bad for our ICM as well. I hope we're going to be folding out those hands. But in reality, with these guys who are marked as purple, we might not be, and so that's a consideration as well. But I think at the end of the day, all in all, these guys are just M8 and M7. So effective PN of 15 and pocket sevens is 58. And I think it's just a fist pump jam. It looks like I have gone down that option. So I think that's completely fine. Obviously, if they're playing correct, not much worse is going to call. They're not going to call with, fives there, unlikely, and sixes, that sort of thing, I think, very often. So it's true that only better will normally call, or, obviously a flip a lot of the time if they've got ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack. But, the problem is if we just raise and get jammed on, like I said, it's just such an ugly spot. We're probably going to have to fold because of the ICM. And, sevens is not a hand that we particularly want to see a flop with if the big blind happen to just flat, So, I'd like to see myself, let me think about this. What was I? Yeah, I guess that's fine. You could go either way. You could do you could really do a lot of different things here. But I do think Algarbi is opening probably wide enough for us to be able to just jam that in at that stack depth. Remember, only seven-handed. He opens with a reasonable frequency. True, he's UTG. But seven-handed, ace-queen, yeah, it's probably okay to do that. What you could do is you could always consider, if he's a very genuine sort of player, ABC, you could actually probably 3-bet and assess. This is actually kind of like the sevens before, where we're going to have to fold now because of the ICM. It's a pretty easy fold. Even though we will be ahead a decent percentage of the time there. Yeah, the ace-queen is, if he had been a tight player and he's open UTG in that spot, imagine it's Sunday Millions and you've got a pretty tight player opening UTG, seven-handed ace-queen there. I think I would actually probably prefer to just flat it, or you could actually probably even just 3-bet it to fold, because he's not going to be getting in, anything worse. He's probably going to jam jacks plus and ace-king, maybe ace-queen suited, but even that's pushing it against a 3-bet after he's open UTG if he's a pretty tight player. I have been reviewing some tournaments recently with some pros. One guy comes to mind, PokerStars Pro from Japan, Ichinose. He actually does that a lot, where he 3-bets to fold with hands that are actually really strong, just because he doesn't figure his opponents are going to be pushing hands in against him any lighter, so he can just sort of put pressure on, but at the same time, knows his beat if he gets played back against. And he does that even sometimes at smaller stack depths at final tables, just because of the ICM. And I think there is some merit to doing that, because, even if he has jacks there, and we 3-bet and then he jams and we fold, it's bad, but it's not that big a deal, because, obviously from pot odds point of view it is, because we're losing a lot of equity, but from an ICM point of view, it's not that horrific, because, we just avoid a variance flip, which, in an ICM dynamic is probably going to be a fold anyway, even after the 3-bet, even if the chip equity suggests otherwise because of the pot odds. Break time, guys. More action coming up shortly.